Our speaker today is Karen Van Vuuren, and Karen has dealt with death in one way or another for nearly 20 years. She has worked in hospice. She has, amongst other things, started a foundation devoted to aspects around dying and death, which is in the we don't have the flyer for this one, but that's okay.
There's some on the lobby table.
There's some on the lobby table that has the links for this, and I guess you will give them
Oh, the workshop.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And the workshop will be December 8th, and let's see, that's the flyer that was. No, that's right. I didn't print that out. So, this is still a learning experience for me. See, I forgot to do that, but that's, maybe we can get that at the end of this, and if you want to pick up a copy of the workshop that's coming up, then we can do that. So, I think Karen's focus now is on opening a store in Lafayette. Here.
Mortuary. It's a death store. It is a death store.
Death store. Okay. It's called
The Natural Funeral.
The Natural Funeral, right. So,
The mortuary.
Opening a business is one of life's great armpits, maybe? And so if she's a bit distracted at times, she'll know why. Right, so let's give a warm welcome to Karen Van Vuuren.
Just to give you maybe a little bit more, so I have a non-profit called Natural Transitions, which I've had since 2003, which really focuses on education and empowerment. And over the years, I've taught workshops on caring for our own dead, to empower people, to demystify, to give people a knowledge of their innate rights and also their legal rights to care for their dead. And we produce a magazine. You can, if you go in the other room later, then you will be able to see an example copy that is there on the table. That one, I think, is about rituals. That's our current issue. Each issue has a theme, and I edit those magazines, and they come out biannually. So that's Natural Transitions, which is a non-profit, educational. And then Dan here in the front row is my steadfast business partner who is founding this amazing holistic mortuary right here in Lafayette, down the street from you, called The Natural Funeral, which hopefully will be opening within a couple of months, and we'll be having a real English tea party there on real bone china, and you can come in the door and maybe scones. Here's another expat with clotted cream and jam, because we're trying to be a community resource as well, not just a mortuary that does not embalm, doesn't use chemicals, and actually believes in consumers' rights and transparency. So, I'm actually going to take you on a journey tonight. So it's new for you guys filming this. It's actually new for me to do this kind of presentation. I often do presentations about what natural death is exclusively, and green burial, and disposition options, really letting people know from an environmental standpoint, from, I guess, even a meaning standpoint, what is really going to help with your healing. What are your options? And this is actually kind of a bit of an indulgent presentation on my part, because I got to look at my biography and how I had really had doors open for me that I went through and was initiated into being with our mortality in a very intimate way, and the lessons I have learned. So it was actually a beautiful process for me to have some contemplation and reflection around, what have these teachings been, and what are personal teachings and what are universal teachings as well about being with our mortality. So this is a presentation about really my close encounters with death, And my experience of the irrefutable evidence that we are not simply a body. And I come from a tradition of esoteric Christianity and am a member of Columbine Spiritual Center. I'm kind of on the same wavelength, I think, with you guys. I personally see death as a spiritual transition. I think it's triumph of spirit. I think I can say this in this group, and actually that's very refreshing to be able to talk about spiritual matters and not just, factual stuff. So you're going to see some slides that are pertinent to this story. I hope that you come away with some notion of how perhaps your own relationship to death might have been enlightened by this talk. And I'm going to ask some questions too, try to make it a little interactive, but I tend to want to download a lot, and you are getting a lot in this. I'm covering like a vast terrain, actually, beyond just talking about natural death care, because I'm also a documentary maker. I've made 2 films that have been used by hospices for education. And there were profound teachings that came about for me from making those films, and they are also about end of life. So we can actually show the first slide. And I want to say this. I've been studying a book by Stephen Cope called Thank you. Sorry, my husband at the back, who's my kind of prompter here, called The Great Work of Your Life. And Stephen quotes from the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, who's saying, when you know who you are, you will know how to act. And in this presentation, it's a lot about, I guess, my own coming to an understanding of who I am, my dharma. And then beyond that, what does it mean to be a human being and our human beingness, which I have come to understand through my encounters with death? If that makes any sense to you. So, one of the teachings, the first teaching, is about the power of rites of passage. Rites of passage that allow us to integrate and be with significant events that are profoundly life-changing. This is my brother, Dirk, sitting in our backyard in London in the swing that my father made for him with the terribly, terribly impractical concrete slab underneath the swing. But Dirk never fell out. But I always looked at that and thought, my goodness. But Dirk is, I think, about 5 years old there, and I've actually just discovered my parents really did not disclose very much at all about my brother and his illness, and it was very hard for them to talk about it, but my true confession is that I always thought I was 2 years older than my brother. I recently found his birth certificate, and I was 3 years older. And he was born in Canada. He was born healthy in a hospital, but contracted hepatitis as a child. So I'm gonna be telling you stories. This is my kind of way of teaching, is telling stories. And he got hepatitis along with a number of other children in that hospital, and was seriously ill from it, and was expected to die, and then did not die, and lived, in fact, for 9 years. And my father was about to divorce my mother at the point where she said she was pregnant with the second child. And my dad was a very dutiful Dutchman, and he stuck by her because this child was so sick, and he worked a day job in a factory and then came home and cared for this child who screamed in the middle of the night because he was in such pain, and there wasn't palliative care and hospice like there is now to really deal with symptoms and pain control. And I was in this family with all of its challenges because my parents were only together really because of my brother. That was why they stayed. And when he died in an ICU, and he was there for months before he died. I did not get to go see him because they didn't let children into the hospital. And when he died, it was simply a phone call that came. I remember standing in the hallway with my mother, knowing that phone call was coming. Children are very connected, I believe. And I knew the phone call was coming to say they'd unplugged life support, which my father had been wanting for a long time to allow death to occur naturally. And then my dad turned to us and said, "That's life. We've got to get on with things." I didn't cry. My mother didn't cry. Well, she did cry, actually, but she was always crying because this had crushed her, this experience of having this very sick child. But there was nothing. There was nothing. There was no rite of passage, no ritual. It was a non-event that remained so for more than a decade for me until I had my own children and was able to then reflect. And the next picture, which I'm indulging myself by having a photo of my children, and I happened to pick one out. The first one I came to was one of them in a swing. Isn't that amazing? So I really didn't make any meaning of the departure of my brother from this world. It did not impact me at the time. And it was only when I had my own children that I started to reflect on what was this experience for my brother of being in an ICU, passing out of this realm into the other with no love to, buoy him up and send him on his way. Although I do believe personally he was received by the angelic realm with lots and lots of love. But even so, I birthed my children very consciously. I created a cradle, a beautiful sacred space for them to come into. I really was very mindful about that, and so I started to reflect on how was it for Dirk, how was it for my mother to also be isolated, no support, like zero, no rite of passage, no funeral, nothing, and then for me too, that I really had not been able to grieve his death fully, and all of my grief came out in my hospice training. Suddenly I started to cry in front of total strangers. And so my brother is my number one spiritual guide while I'm doing this work. He really came through for me when I had my children and was just saying, what about me? What happened to me? What was my life about? And I actually started to think about what was his life. It's so hard for us to go there. Like, children are in our culture, not supposed to die before us, and it's unfathomable to come to some conclusion for many people. But I have come to a conclusion, and my brother he's not just my spiritual guide doing this work. He is also someone who came into our family to bring out love, because my parents could not show love to each other, and he was a love being. He was truly a love being, a sun being, who had a role in my mind. This is my meaning, and if we can come to some understanding of what a life is about, it can be transformative for us, like beyond the tragedy of and the pain of separating from the physical person. So I started to reflect about ritual. Debbie. I started to reflect about ritual, that ritual is healing, or can be healing, for those times when, especially, we are beyond words. It's a way for us to hold sometimes something that seems impossible to hold. And I think it also, for me, it's quite clear that often it's the language of the spiritual world. Sometimes if I'm stepping into holding a ritual for a family that is really struggling with loss, I feel that it's coming through me rather than me being the absolute author. It's the spiritual world kind of guiding what comes to me to assist that family. So that was natural transitions. If we can go back to the last slide, can I honor you, or are you wanting to be anonymous? This is, you can't really see so well, and you're going to actually see a clip later of the kind of sacred death care that I facilitate. But this is a room which has been decorated by a very loving community, and community is one of my themes, one of the teachings I have come to understand as I've come to understand community as being something that can really transform how we are with something very difficult when community can come together. And in this instance, a community came together for a really hard loss of Debbie's son, and Debbie's in the front row. She's an angel. And her son died, is it 2 years now? A year and a half ago. And this is the beautiful room in their house that their community decorated so that his body could come back home after he had been at the coroner's. And he died from something that a lot of young people are sadly dying from an opiate overdose. And I walked into this space, though, and his name was Jacob, and I didn't know what I was going to walk into. I thought actually I'd be really feeling the heaviness. I felt such love in that room, and I felt this upliftedness, and I felt Jacob was receiving it as well. And it was truly the most beautiful space I have seen of a home funeral setting. And we call them home funerals. This is when families do things at home themselves to really kind of reclaim something that we used to do, right, ourselves before we had mortuaries and the funeral industry, which is really only the last 120 years or so, 130 years. Before that, it was always the domain of the home. So anyway, and actually this here is a massage table that has a silk on it, and then there's a casket. And that's where Jacob was. Yes, it was actually just cardboard, but you would not have known because it was so beautifully decorated, and the room was full of candles and flowers and essential oils. I mean, it was gorgeous. And so beauty aesthetics, that's a teaching that I've got from my work, is that when we can bring beauty in, that is an antidote as well, or it's balm. I get not criticized, people don't always understand when I say balm, and they think I'm talking about a B-O-M-B, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a B-A-L-M. It's balm for our souls when we can have beauty surround us and love and community. So we can go to the next slide. This is just a quickie. This is the magazine. You can get that online for free as an e-version if you are interested. And this is actually not a book that I wrote. This is written by the head of the Funeral Consumers Alliance, and it's about what families can and can't do, because I've always been a champion of people knowing what they can do. Even though now I'm starting a mortuary and we could do for you, ultimately I want your experience, we want your experience to be one that is healing, and if you want to participate in any way, feel comfortable, then that's what we advocate for as well. So, next slide. Okay. I want to say, actually, you can look at this slide, but I want to say something about Jacob, if I may. I didn't know Debbie was coming, but I did want to talk about that experience because it was a sudden death. But to paint a little picture, and I will show you a clip in a moment, this was the most difficult of circumstances because we had no preparation, right? And people are in shock. But this was a family that was very connected to a community, and when something tragic happens and you know that someone is, in pain, if you can offer something, do something for them, it's as meaningful for them as it is for you. And this community decorated that room you saw earlier. They were Jacob's former teachers, right, who stepped in to do that. There was this crew of people who were absolutely amazing. Like, it was the, I have to say, it was the best. Which kind of sounds like an oxymoron, like, really, in those circumstances? But it truly was the best it could have been, I think. And he came home, and, he was washed, blessed with love by people who had a connection to him in life, which was really meaningful. And anointed with essential oils, which is an ancient practice. Frankincense is the quintessential anointing oil, and is associated with spiritual transformation and transcendence. And these friends, these loving people, did that for him, and the family got to have time with him in a setting that was not the very challenging setting of when they had found him. It was a different experience, and that, I think, was really healing, right? So the teachings so far have been the power of rite of passage. Like, I experienced nothing, but actually experiencing nothing kind of got me to where I am. Right? It's interesting in life. Like, that wasn't ideal, but out of that I got to, not ideal, but that wasn't how it could have been. But out of that I got to really ask, well, okay, so what could have been? And what can be for others? And community, when community can come together. Quaker groups used to, I don't know if so many do it now, Quaker groups used to have care circles where when someone died, there would be a team in the community, that would come together and help, and maybe even build the casket and provide meals. These care circles, in the Jewish community, there are groups that are going to perform a sacred ritual when death occurs, washing the body. I feel like spiritual communities, faith communities, could reclaim this to some degree. They could create their own care teams. Just an idea. So back to as I said, I've been reading about the Bhagavad Gita, and one of the teachings that Krishna brings to Arjuna, and that is that the origin of all fearlessness is facing death. And I will say that being with death has really taught me to live fairly fearlessly. I'm not fear-free, but much less than before I embarked on having this really close up-front experience with our mortality, that this is where we will all ultimately be. So how am I facing my challenges? Am I rising to them, or am I giving in to my fear? And I've learned that to live fearlessly, you have to bring out the love, if that makes sense to you. That love, when there is fear, is the way through. And it's also ultimately loving ourselves and our humanity. This is Joseph. I'm going to give you a little tour of some home funerals, and then I'm going to move on to something a little different, which is about how do we approach death and what are the ingredients for peaceful transition. So this is Joseph. I believe in giving visuals about death because it's so much not part of our culture. Who's been to a visitation in a mortuary? Okay. And this is not a mortuary, by the way, but is there any resemblance?
Is that a star house?
Yeah. It is. This was the first person to have his body at the Star House. I don't even know if they've done it since, but he was waked like a king. Some people believe that in order for the spiritual process to really unfold, that we allow the body to rest, lie in honor for some time, and there can be prayers and meditation. And this was the case with this gentleman, Joseph, and he got to go to the Star House and have some time there. And he's placed on ice, dry ice. That's a way to preserve the body after death. This isn't really a talk about, natural death care, but I'm giving you some glimpses because I'm sort of trying to give you the full Monty here of of my wares, and this was just an amazing spectacle, honestly, in a very beautiful way. Again, community coming together, absolutely wanting to show their love, the aesthetics being really part of bringing something transformative to the passing that wasn't easy. And he's actually wrapped in silk. He decided that he wanted to be swaddled for his birth into spirit. And so he ended up wrapped in this beautiful silk and placed on, I think that's a massage table. We can do the next slide. And here's a close-up. He also got covered with rose petals. So creativity around death as well, that we can have these expressions of love that are not like cookie cutter, it's always done this way. It's done your way, and it is in line with, who your person was. And he ended up looking extremely golden and lying and having this beautiful silk that was gold-colored wrapped around him. We might do the clip, actually. So I'm going to show you a clip. It's very short. It's only 5 minutes. It's from a movie called A Family Undertaking, and these are just still images, right? But I wanted you to just kind of get a picture of a family that is doing something that really is part of their community to have an honoring of their loved one at death. So this is the DVD, which my friend here is hopefully going to be able to pull up.
Okay. I don't know about the sound.
Oh, is there no sound? That,
Does anybody know how to do this? Okay, hold on, I just paused it. Do you know how to do this? To connect the sound?
The sound.
Is it plugged in?
Yeah, it's my problem, I forgot to unmute it.
oh,
Oh, okay. Okey dokey. Okay, hang on one second. Line up old and smooth. Okay.
Here's your Chardonnay.
Thank you.
Here's to
Here's to
the
the
time of
time.
our life. My wife was diagnosed with breast cancer 3 years ago. It was a pretty aggressive tumor. And now it's into her bones as well as her lungs and liver.
I can even breathe.
Shortly after the second mastectomy, I got very depressed. In fact, got drunk and very angry. And she just said, if this is the way you're going to deal with my death, you can't be part of it. And that just shook me to the core, and I realized that this was it. This was final. I didn't have time to be a jerk. My priority is Ann. We don't have much of a future, so let's just stay in the present and be with each other and attend to each other.
I really think I'm very close. I'm going out of here soon. We got to have this clear in everybody's minds so that they don't fall apart. Because people are used to having me in charge of stuff.
Yeah, I didn't choose a home funeral. Ann chose the home funeral. And I didn't find out that there even was such a thing until Ann told me that she was going to have one. She made it very clear that she wanted to die at home, and she wanted her body to stay at home. I think she decided to have the home funeral just because it's the way she's always done everything. She doesn't like an industrial approach to anything. And she finally had found a way that she could die and have a funeral that was in accordance with the way she lived her life. Ann died this morning at 2:49. You can't really prepare yourself. It's hard. There's just no two ways about it. We had a bowl of warm, soapy water with some aromatic oils in it. Then the hard part was dressing her, but we managed to do it. And then we just laid her out. You know, she's there. She's very peaceful. And I think part of it is that it's a reassurance that she's not there. You know, you see this body, it's beautiful, it looks like Ann, it's not. Somebody else over here?
Very well done.
She was never that cooperative in life.
Yes,
I'm good. I'm fine. Coming in? Yeah. Right. There's a little favorite perfume, I think we put that on.
Our Lord, we give you thanks today that we can remember and steward with love and with appreciation and with great admiration. And Dwight, the love is so apparent between the two of you, and it will never cease.
Amen.
It is eternal.
I'm a friend of the family, and I'm often described as the person who introduced Anne and Dwight. I had no idea what I was doing then. I just said, Anne, this is Dwight. And they, like magnetic particles, came together and have stayed together, and I've seen a real marriage.
The bittersweetness of our journey is that the deeper we love, the more we are touched. Maybe the more we hurt, the harder it is to let go. But what a joy to love deeply. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Into the hands of God we commend our dear sister. Amen. Amen.
I think people go to the mortuary because they want to put those emotions away because they're afraid they're going to feel hurt. And, it just isn't like that. You don't feel hurt. You feel intense love. It's not an experience you look forward to, but it is a transforming experience. Yeah, it is a transforming experience.
Okay, that's it. I wanted to show you that because, as I said, I don't think that this idea of a home funeral is something that is a concept familiar to many people at all. And I've had the privilege of working with hundreds of families who've done things at home, but I recognize that that's challenging for families, resources or their space or other people in the family who are not on board, which is part of the reason why starting a mortuary with a space that has a chapel, a sanctuary for this kind of intimate, beautiful, natural death care is, part of our mission, and it's kind of the culmination of actually my life's work, I would say, at this point. So fingers crossed, in a couple of months we'll have that available. I've got a few more slides if we can go back. I'm going to finish my tour or my introduction to home funerals and then move on to actually what is peaceful transition and what I have learned about that with being with the dying. But got a few more images I want to show you. Talking about community, this is just one that I got a kick out of. This is a wonderful family where the deceased Stuart, he died on a camping trip in New Mexico just a few weeks after he'd retired and had some kind of heart episode and died in the hospital there in, I can't remember where, somewhere in New Mexico. And
Is it married to Sylvia?
Sylvine, indeed. Yes. I show these slides and then, it's a small world that we live in Boulder County. Yeah. So he was a wonderful man who supported my work and wanted to actually in his retirement support me and go out and do presentations about natural death care and green options at end of life. And unfortunately, 2 weeks after retirement, died. And he did get to come home and have some time in his apartment in East Boulder with community, and this beautiful washing of the body happened. And then he went to a natural burial ground in Fort Collins, where you can go into the ground without embalming, just in a biodegradable casket. That's a whole nother presentation about natural burial. If you want to come to my workshop on the 8th, I'll talk a lot about that. But they really want to do things themselves, to be connected in this very intimate way. And they hired a U-Haul because nobody had a van that they could put him in. And you could be judgmental. Oh, that's not so respectful. It was totally respectful. It was so much who these people were. It was beautiful. So he went off to the Fort Collins Cemetery in the U-Haul and showed up there. I think they kind of had some raised eyebrows when he arrived, but it was just so right. So. Next slide. This was an unexpected death of a young person who died in Boulder Creek in 2014. There's a whole story there, which I don't think I'm going to go into, but I'm actually really wanting to mention something about children and their encounters with death, because I feel kind of strongly, as a child who was kept away from my brother's transition, his death, his passing. I feel if we hold death in a way that is with some understanding of what it is from a spiritual viewpoint, or without fear and with love and with community really coming into play, that can be a very positive experience for children. If we are in our own place of fear and we're undone by what has happened, maybe it's not that we take our children when we ourselves can't hold it for them, if you see what I mean. The adults, are the models. And that's also not to say, if you're undone by something, that you shouldn't be undone by it, you just are. But if you have fear around being with somebody who has died, you would not necessarily want to bring your child there, because your own fear is going to be passed on to them. That's what I'm saying. So I feel like it can be a wonderful teaching when there is community, when there is love, when there is support. You get to see that as a child. I didn't, but. So next slide. Green burial, I'll mention that very briefly. This is the kind of place sort of where Stuart went. This is more than actually just a green burial cemetery with a section that is green. This is conservation burial, which is a way to preserve land and allow a natural return to the earth. This is in South Carolina, and there are a few around the country. We don't have anything nearby in this state, sadly. More on that in another presentation. And just to kind of give you a totally different image, this is Crestone, and this is a pyre cremation. Now that is a very interesting community. Have you been to Crestone? Has anyone been to the pyre and seen the pyre? They have a community cremation pyre, which is renewable wood that is fueling it. It's actually made to be relatively efficient as well. The Dutch guy who designed it was very proud of his construction and how it really was efficient. And they gather around as a community when somebody passes and wants to have a fire cremation. And they sing, and there's a whole ritual, and it's pretty amazing. So I just wanted to throw that in there because, who's going to see a cremation pyre in everyday life? And this actually is somebody who was cremated on a pyre in Boulder County. And she was cremated on a farm, at a farm in Boulder. I got to actually witness her cremation. It was kind of unusual, but they had permission to do it. And children, which I just mentioned. This is a boy who, I can't remember how old he was when his mom died, and she's in that box and in their van. And often families will get these cardboard boxes and cover them with silks or decorate them. And if we can be creatively connected with death, I have learned, I'm thinking of my teachings here, to be creatively involved with death is also healing and transformative. And children who cannot necessarily express themselves in words can express themselves through art. And that's what the children in this family did when their mom died. She was in her 40s with lymphoma. And not just her two children, but other children in the community. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few minutes actually I'm going to stop talking and give you a few minutes to turn to a neighbor if you would. And I would like to pose a question to you. There's this term called the good death, which I hear, and I have some issues about it, I have to say, because there's a little bit of judgment in there, good as opposed to, good, bad. And I prefer another term, but I'm not going to talk about that quite yet. But we're talking about dying, not the after-death care now. What are maybe 3 things you think would be the ingredients for a good death? So we'll just take a few minutes here to turn to a neighbor and consider what those might be.
That's what you're asking?
I think there's also something nice just the honor of
Should they have a bowl? I'm going to rally us in a minute. You're grabbing yourself a tea. Oh, something more than a tea. Do you need a?
Yeah.
I'm gonna ding in a minute. Get your tea though.
I have no idea.
You're getting ice cream. That's it's a bit naughty. Oh, cream puffs. Ah, oh my goodness. Very naughty.
Ah.
Okay, so sorry about that. I meant to bring my singing bowl, and I'm like, I'll improvise. Okay, ding ding. Oh, you have one. Ooh, okay. This one. Does it? Ooh, it's very deep. Wow. Wow. Oh, yes. It's still going. Thoughts? Am I on again? Yes. Okay. Can't tell. Yeah. Who would like to share a little bit? Please don't be shy. No judgment. It's
Okay,
just.
We talked about going with preparation and hopefully fearlessly, but who knows until you're there, and with grace.
So I'm just going to repeat it. So going with preparation, fearlessly, and with grace. Would you like to say something more about the going with preparation piece?
Well, that was
Having a little time where you kind of know when you're going. You have an idea of when you're going, and you've got a certain portion of life left that's so sacred and valuable, and you can say things to the people you want to say and face things in yourself that you want to face, and be there in the face of death fearlessly, as we were saying, but consciously.
So preparation time, you get a heads up, you can be there consciously
Yeah,
in the
not
face
a
of death.
coma.
Not in a coma. Okay? Okay. And not drugged, so more conscious and seemingly in the experience. Okay. I'm Jenny.
Well, it reminded me in a way what I've been seeing of the way that sannyasis with Osho, which would have been, would celebrate somebody when they died, including Osho. And there was a samadhi on the ranch where body was burned, and there was dancing and music, and it was a lovely way, really.
So that's a good death. So Osho, if you're familiar, spiritual teacher from the East, interestingly enough, the magazine's actually going to carry 3 stories from people who are in Osho who bring these teachings to their hospices in other countries. The next issue is going to have that in it, and the celebration of death is a key piece.
Yeah.
So thank you. Anyone else? Jamie.
Well, it was we had an interesting conversation between these 2 extremes. One is the sort of lingering death that, we all know stories of elderly relatives, whatever, that just seem to be almost actively dying for years. I don't think anybody would wish that upon themselves. And then the other thing is the pros and cons about it. Is it better to go just in your sleep, just painlessly seeing it?
Mm-hmm. So right, yeah. How much?
My mother always used to say, she died at 96 3 years ago, I wish I could wake up dead. I'd like to wake up dead.
So Jenny said, yeah, her mother always said she wished she could wake up dead.
Yep.
And Jamie was saying that there's that question of going quickly in your sleep, or the not so palatable, attractive prospect of lingering for years. And where I'm going and what I learned from this film, because we are talking here about teachings, right? And I'm trying to share with you what I got from my encounters with death. What I got from this film, and I actually don't think I'm going to show you the trailer. We'll show the next trailer for the other film, but what I learned from making a film about Dr. Michael Miller, who was a Boulder resident and chose to stop eating at end of life, was a lot more than what happens when you stop eating and drinking when you are end stage and your body is not able anyway to deal with you putting in food and taking in nourishment you can't metabolize, and you may have more discomfort if you have tumors from cancer and more inconvenience of, being toileted more frequently because of intake. I learned way more than just all that physiological stuff that he thought I was going to focus the film on, which it's certainly a teaching about stopping eating and drinking voluntarily when you're end stage, but it ended up being more about when you're going to leave, how can you leave and have peace at end of life because you are current with your relationships, because you feel you have said goodbye to those you want to say goodbye to. You have said, I love you, to those who you really want to hear it. You have said thank you to those to whom you have deep gratitude. And you have said, forgive me for the things I did wrong unknowingly or knowingly, and I forgive you. And those are the 5 ingredients that hospices often talk about that really are key, and this is from my experience as well, to leave this world feeling I'm at peace, I'm complete with all I am leaving behind. And so Dr. Miller, and you can see the film online, dyingwishmedia.com. It's a half-hour documentary. It's pretty short. It's used by hospices for education about stopping eating and drinking, but as I said, I was actually more interested in doing life review with Dr. Miller at the end. I kind of took him on a journey to kind of look at his life and where he was complete. He was a really complete human being and had incredible peace around how he was, what he was leaving behind. And so in my mind, it's how can we achieve peaceful death, peaceful transition, and that is kind of, for me, the good death more than anything else, and how we are with these things, whether we have reached forgiveness about stuff, whether we have been able to have closure and feel good about relationships, that is going to impact the whole journey profoundly. And I've seen how there's such a close relationship with physical and spiritual pain. And if you can address spiritual pain, distress, it really, really can transform the physical experience of death. This is my teaching from being with people at the end and really seeing that. Even my father, he was in labor at the end. He had lung cancer, and it was like a freight train in that room, this really, really loud breathing. And for me, that's a labor. That death is a process just like birth is, and there is a labor, and you're working towards something, towards this birth. My dad's in this labor that is extremely noisy and hard for his wife, his second wife, to be with. And we had a not very good relationship, to say the least. And I was caring for him at the end in his house in Toronto because he had a horror of going to hospital because of my brother's death and dying there. So I went to be with him so he could be at home for the last month and had to be with his second wife. That was the hardest part of the whole thing, not caring for my father, it was actually living with her. And I wrote a journal about that just to stay sane. But he had such anxiety and worry about how it was going to be with Alice and how our relationship was going to be after he'd gone. And here he is laboring away, and I'm holding his hand, and Alice is on the other side of the bed holding his hand. And I have to speak this. I have to tell my father that I'm really going to work hard to resolve our stuff so that we can find peace with each other. I have to say this. He's glassy-eyed, in a coma, end of life approaching. I say, Dad, just know I am really committing to finding resolution with the issues that I have with Alice and she has with me. We're really going to work on that, and you can go knowing that. His breathing changed like that. It was like switch flipped. And he went within a few minutes. So I think he had spiritual distress around that. And also, being in a coma does not mean that you cannot be perceiving what is in that room. How we show up with our emotions, our stuff, the dying person is absolutely getting. So, watch what you bring into that room. But peaceful transition, it is really the spiritual components, the relationship components are really key to having a good death. And I'm using that term now, even though I don't like it. Can we have the next slide? I think I'm doing all right with time. I'm going to leave some time for questions at the end. This is the catalyst for my second film, which is my father, who is over driving the tank. And he's in Indonesia in this picture. He actually was in World War II, and then afterwards in the Dutch efforts to put down the independence movement in Indonesia, and he did not think that was, in the end, a war that should have been fought, and was, I think, felt a lot of shame about being in that war. But anyway, my dad is, yeah, that's good. You can go to the next picture. My dad is the inspiration for this film, and it is a segue. And I do realize that we talked about after death, and here we are talking about before death and peaceful transition. But it's kind of it's been my path, right? First, I worked with after more than the dying. When I made this film, I really started to focus on the forgiveness piece. What we mentioned, those 5 things, thank you, goodbye, forgive me, forgive you, I love you. The forgiveness piece really became for me very central to whether we die at peace, say it that way, or not. My dad was in World War II as a 14-year-old soldier. He was Dutch. His village was occupied by the Germans. They siphoned off all the food. People were starving in the streets. And my dad was a very angry 14-year-old boy, 6 foot tall. And when my dad was dying, he had shared very little about his life because he actually had undiagnosed post-traumatic stress and just kept everything in and toughed it out and did not show emotions and had addictions, kind of classic, actually post-traumatic stress symptoms. And he didn't talk about anything. And because, I had this life review thing, like, oh, let's get current with our life. And, I could go down that path a little bit with my father, probably not very far, but I'm going to try. I asked him about growing up in Holland because he had shared very little about those times. And I was not prepared for what he eventually shared with me. And he's sitting in this chair. He'd kind of had a bit of a stroke, we think. And he said, well, when I was 14, me and my best friend, we strangled a German soldier in the village. And I just received it. I actually didn't feel I wanted to or could respond. And then he continued, and he said, we had to take him out. People were starving, and we just had to do it. And there was a pause. And then he said, and I don't know, the soldier was maybe 19. Maybe he didn't know quite how he'd got to be in this village, but it was the enemy. What I heard was, I heard my dad, who would not ever do this in those words, asking for forgiveness for taking this young German soldier's life, and kind of, in a way, asking for forgiveness of himself that he did that. And my dad actually ran away and became a soldier with the Allies, 6 foot tall, after they strangled the German soldier. He ran away, became part of the Allied forces, don't know quite what transpired, but, he was a child soldier, and his childhood was really, he did not have it, and he grew up, and actually never really grew up, honestly. But talking to my father got me thinking about the experience of veterans at end of life, and it seems like my family has a very strong influence on me. My dad was the reason that I made this film, because I sat down with some hospice people one day who worked at the VA in Denver, and I said, so what's it like working with veterans at end of life who have maybe, moral conscience issues around things they've done in war, and it's unresolved, and when you reach end of life, existential questions come up big time, because we are leaving, and what are we leaving behind? And so I embarked on making this film because I wanted to understand and make a film for caregivers who are caring for veterans. And the forgiveness piece ended up being the biggest issue with veterans who have been in wars and have had to violate moral codes that they otherwise would have obviously observed. Taking of a life is, even in war, a hard thing to do, and should be. So that's Go in Peace, which is the name of the documentary that I made about veterans. And beyond forgiveness, so if we can forgive ourselves and forgive others, sometimes it's also atonement before we die. So for veterans, for instance, there was one veteran I came across who had killed water buffalo in Vietnam as a sport, for sport. And he contributed money to a fund to buy buffalo for Vietnamese villagers. And it may not be that it's something we do that is, material offering. It can be that we are just passing on some wisdom to another generation that is kind of making things whole again. Atonement also means we could take it apart and say at one meant, right? Making whole something that is broken and maybe repairing in some way by offering wisdom about what you have learned from your experience, some teaching from your life. That is also something that is really key to making us feel there's a legacy and we are good with what we are leaving in this life. So I want to emphasize that forgiveness is not denial of our own hurt. It is not about inviting an abuser back into our lives. It is not forgetting real wounds and betrayal. It is about integrating the past and understanding how it has shaped who we are and taking responsibility for our actions, ultimately, right? So owning our own stuff. That brings peace. So that, there is the old adage, we can't change our relationship to the past. No, we can't change the past, but we can change how we relate to it, right? So working with that film, working with the veterans was a profound teaching for me. And veterans who are dealing with existential questions, they are spiritually questing in a way that is triggered by their impending death. This is my final image for you. Who can tell me what this is? Okay, so if you haven't seen one, this is a very, very special plant. This is called a night-blooming cereus plant, also known as the Queen of the Night cactus flower. I always forget that name. So it is a not very attractive plant that grows in the desert, doesn't really have anything so attractive when it's not blooming. And it blooms one night a year. One night a year. and shoots out this incredible flower. Absolutely incredible. So I wanted to leave you with an image of something really beautiful. And I think that this flower, if you have the opportunity to see it, and there are actually Facebook groups of people who own these flowers, and then when it's blooming, they call each other, and you get to kind of sit and bask in its glory. But to me, it's about beauty, because it's in the night, it blooms, right? It's about bringing beauty and light to darkness. And that is the most profound of all of the teachings that I have been privileged to receive in working with death, and what I wanted to leave you with. And I actually also want to leave you with a poem that I talked about. So I talked about the origin of all fearlessness is the facing of death. And there's a poet called Naomi Shihab Nye. Does anyone know who she is? She's a contemporary poet. And she has a poem called Kindness. And she contends that the origin of kindness is in loss, which is an interesting idea. And I want to read you this poem because it's my favorite. I'm really a huge poetry fan these days. So, and just think about the meaning. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment, like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go. So you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you. How he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, "It is I you have been looking for," and then goes with you everywhere, like a shadow or a friend. Thank you. I only left you 5 minutes, and you don't have to stay, but if you want to say anything, I'm here.
I'd like to see the film about the doctor, what's it called again?
Dying Wish.
Dying Wish documentary. Okay.
Yeah. And it's okay. I feel like I've given you an awful lot, and thank you for going on the journey with me through my life, and I'm still on it, of course.
So out of the five, forgiveness, and your own work, which one do you see yourself working on as your life?
Oh gosh, that's a very personal question. What do I work on? I think forgiveness is the hardest for most of us, and probably for me too, to truly be at peace with past happenings that have caused wounds. Yeah. Because sometimes we say we've forgiven, but then, we kind of come back with memories come back and feelings arise, and, to love everyone who is not necessarily very lovable.
So what does forgiveness mean to you? I mean, with somebody say like a sibling or something?
Right. I think it's, for me, really being able to tap into who they are in their highest humanity.
Even if you might not even see them anymore.
Yes.
You can
Right, and you can, and there are things we can do, even though we may never be able to have that encounter where we're forgiving each other, where, there is something like writing a letter that doesn't necessarily get to them, but you've kind of, I'm in a spiritual community, offering it to the spiritual world, that you really do send this through the ethers, this love and heart connection with this person beyond what, your past experience was with them. Yeah. I'll say briefly, I had a family recently where the dad died suddenly and had died from alcoholism, and the grown children, were already heartbroken at the loss of their father because of the alcoholism. And then when he died because of it, it was like he died before. And part of their ritual, I mean, we're talking about rituals being healing to integrate loss and find meaning, was writing something to their father. Even though he had passed beyond this world, to write something from their heart and have a ceremony where, when they spread his ashes, they offered this and then burnt it, and that kind of was the ritual. Yeah. Oh.
So how will we know when you're supposed to be open?
Well, if you want to get on the tea party list, we have a tea party list in the other room, and we will notify you, and you can come for the high tea. And maybe we'll have, maybe there'll be a media blitz. Who knows?
Go to the Devonshire Cream.
Yeah, there you go. Jenny, you can bring some of it. Well, it's down the street. You can always pay attention. 102 Westchester, right next to Festival Plaza, because we are about celebrating life as well. So.
You mentioned, I don't know if that's probably is in your writing here, but that you were going to have a library. Could you just explain?
So we in part of the center, and it's a mortuary, we're calling that too, will be a room where we have products, we have essential oils and natural funeral products, but we'll also have selected books for sale, and Natural Transitions has a library that I've accumulated over these years, and so we'll have a little bit of they're hard to manage, libraries, I know, books kind of sometimes just don't come back, but we're going to try it to have a library, and we'll have people there who also are kind of wise guides around. It might not be funeral stuff. It could be, understanding the loss from Alzheimer's. There are many deaths that occur that are not the physical death. The death of the person that you knew ostensibly with a disease like Alzheimer's. We'll have a wide range of resources for people. So we want to be we're more than a mortuary. That's our gig. Yeah, and the sacred chapel for, having rituals and other kind of regular mortuary stuff, and small group seminars for, having talks and practical things like advanced directives. So it's a different model, and Boulder is a good place to try it, we think.
Did you ever consider becoming a minister? I mean, not a regular minister. The ones who I've seen in hospice and all that.
Oh, a chaplain?
Chaplain.
Considered it, yeah. But I feel like I do that in my work anyway. So, yeah. Oh, someone at the back, and there. Oh, could I repeat the 5? Yeah. How about let's see who can. Well, other people can come up with them. Come on.
I love you.
I love you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Forgive me. Forgive you. And yes, goodbye. To be able to say people hang on till they can say goodbye. In a number of instances, they'll wait till the last grandchild has flown in, and can be very, very much to do with that sort of timing. And person at the back there.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, I know that a lot of indigenous cultures do the whole washing of the body as a community, and I'm wondering what is the symbolism about washing and cleaning the body?
Mm-hmm. I'll give you my answer. I think it is a recognition beyond a cleaning, because somebody might have had a bed bath or something beyond. I mean, I'm not talking necessarily indigenous cultures, but it could apply. I think it's a purification ritual. It's a recognition of the body now being in a different state, because there is an excarnation process that is happening, and it's a blessing of the body, this vessel that housed the spirit, the soul, the energy, whatever you want to call it, during life, that is sacred. So it's actually a sacred rite that afterwards I can see I can see the difference, like energetically. Before somebody has been washed and blessed and anointed, to afterwards. I mean, to me anyway, it's really visible. Oh my gosh, like there's something glowing about the person. Whatever their disease process is, I can see there is a beauty from this act of love.
And it sounds like Colorado is okay with this non-traditional.
Oh, actually, not just Colorado. In most U.S. states, I mean, when I teach my workshops, talk more about laws and things, like people just don't know what the law is. They make assumptions, oh, can't do that. That's the domain of. And actually, families have the right to do a lot. And they may not be doing days with the body, but it's not an emergency. When someone dies, you can take time to do something that is meaningful, that allows you to rest into this event that is significant, and not to be rushing and doing and on the phone and got to take care of all these things, but to just breathe and be with it, whether, you wash the body or not, but just to really allow that space.
Maybe just a little bit of a comment. When you were talking about a good death and some of the comments on having time to prepare, I think about this a lot, that I don't want to wait until I have a terminal illness or I'm a month from death
Thank you.
before I've done my
Yeah.
operations
Mm-hmm.
and done my 5 or whatever.
Do your 5 today.
Yeah, it was probably 10 years ago or something, I stumbled across a book by Stephen Levine called
A year to live, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It kind of takes you through a whole process you could do today.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, all of the teachings about death are really also about life. So, we're over 8:30, so don't feel you have to stay.
So is your
Thank you.
facility going to have storage?
Yes, we will be mortuary-like in that way, yes.
It's all in the same place then? The
Yes.
chapel and everything?
Uh-huh.
And you said it's Westchester, right by the spring?
It's you'll be able to see us from Festival Plaza, and there will be some days where there's a lot going on there, right? And but mostly there isn't, so it's okay. And
What goes on there is usually celebrated.
I know, and there are children outside. There's life. There's ice cream. There's comfort food nearby. So.
Okay, let's give Karen a good hand. Thank you so much, Karen. Okay, so there in the celebration hall, down the hallway here are drinks, hot tea, cold tea. There's ice cream, there's pie.
But you don't have stones, do you?
No stones.
To practice weight.
And
No
nuts,
pie.
and there is like lettuce and tomato and dips. I can't think of the word for it. At any rate, lots of food. Share, come and let's chat.
Thank you. Hey Jay, it'll be a practice weight.
It'll be a practice way.